Black man discovers secret tunnel on his property, walks in and instantly regrets it. The rusted key turned with surprising ease, as if the old farmhouse had been waiting for Devin Brooks all along. He stood on the sagging front porch, his laptop bag slung over one shoulder, staring at the peeling white paint and crooked shutters of what was now his property. At 34, Devin had inherited Stranger Things, his ex-girlfriend's cat, his college roommate's debt, but never a house that seemed to watch him back. Uncle Eli had been finished 3 months before anyone thought to tell Devin. The lawyer's call came on a Tuesday morning while Devin was debugging code for a restaurant chain's website, his Atlanta apartment buzzing with the familiar hum of his 3 monitors and the coffee maker that never quite shut off. "Mr. Brooks? This is regarding your uncle, Elijah Brooks. I'm afraid he passed away, and you're listed as his sole beneficiary." Devin had paused his keyboard mid-type. "Uncle Eli? I haven't seen him since I was maybe 10 years old." But here he was in Narrows Edge, Georgia, population 847 according to the faded welcome sign, holding the keys to a house that smelled like old wood and something else, something that made his nose wrinkle the moment he stepped inside. The farmhouse groaned under his weight as he walked through rooms filled with dust motes dancing in afternoon sunlight. Most of the furniture sat covered in white sheets like ghosts frozen mid-conversation. The kitchen still held the phantom scent of coffee and bacon, as if Uncle Eli had just stepped out for a walk. Devin found himself moving quietly, though he couldn't say why. He'd driven down from Atlanta with a simple plan: spend a week cleaning out the house, hire a contractor to handle any major repairs, and flip it for whatever the rural Georgia market would bear. His freelance web development business could run from anywhere with decent internet, and this little detour would give him a nice chunk of change to finally upgrade his equipment. But the smell kept bothering him. It hit him strongest in what must have been Uncle Eli's study, a cramped room lined with emptied bookshelves and a desk that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The odor seemed to rise from the floorboards themselves, sweet and sickly, like fruit left too long in the sun. Devin propped open the study windows, but the thick July air outside offered no relief. If anything, the heat seemed to make the smell worse. "Probably a finished possum under the house," he muttered, making a mental note to call an exterminator. His first trip to town for supplies introduced him to the unique rhythm of Narrows Edge. The hardware store clerk, a weathered man named Pete who looked like he'd been carved from the same oak as his counter, gave Devin a long look when he mentioned the farmhouse. "You're Eli's nephew," Pete said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Devin Brooks." Pete nodded slowly, his fingers drumming against the cash register. "Eli was a good man. Kept to himself mostly. That house has been in your family a long time." "So I heard. I'm planning to fix it up, probably sell it." Something flickered across Pete's weathered face. "Might want to think on that some. House like that, it's got history. Heavy with old sorrow, my grandmother used to say." Devin forced a laugh. "Well, hopefully nothing a good coat of paint can't fix." But Pete didn't smile back. He just handed over the change and said, "You be careful out there, son. Some things are better left buried." The comment stuck with Devin as he drove back to the farmhouse, his truck bed loaded with cleaning supplies and basic tools. What had Pete meant by heavy with old sorrow? And why did everyone in town seem to know more about his family than he did? That evening, Devin sat on the front porch with a beer and his laptop, trying to get some work done while the sun set behind the pecan trees that lined the property. The peaceful setting should have been perfect for concentration, but he found himself distracted by the silence. In Atlanta, there was always noise, traffic, neighbors, the constant hum of the city. Here, the quiet felt thick enough to touch. His phone rang, startling him. His father's name lit up the screen. "Hey, Dad." "Devin." His father's voice carried that familiar weight it always had when discussing family matters. "I heard you went down to Eli's place. The lawyer said I inherited it. Figured I should check it out." A long pause. "Your uncle, he wasn't like other people, son. Always kept his own counsel. That house. Yeah, everyone keeps saying that. What's the deal with this place?" Pete at the hardware store acted like it was haunted or something. His father's laugh came out hollow. Not haunted. Just complicated. Eli had his reasons for keeping to himself. Maybe it's better to let sleeping dogs lie. Dad, what aren't you telling me? Nothing that matters now. Just be careful, Devin. And maybe don't stay there too long. The line went dead, leaving Devin staring at his phone in the gathering darkness. His father had always been tight-lipped about family history, but this felt different. This felt like fear. Back inside, Devin tried to settle into the master bedroom, but the smell from the study seemed to seep through the walls. He managed to identify it now, something organic, definitely rotting, but with an underlying chemical tang that reminded him of the biology labs from high school. Unable to sleep, he found himself standing in the study doorway at midnight, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the warped floorboards that seemed to sag in the center of the room. One board in particular looked different from the others, newer, like it had been replaced recently. Devin knelt and pressed his palm against the wood. It gave slightly under pressure, and he could swear he felt air moving beneath it. The smell was strongest here, rising from whatever lay below. His rational mind told him to wait until morning, to call a professional, to handle this the smart way. But curiosity had always been Devin's weakness, the same trait that made him good at debugging code and terrible at leaving mysteries unsolved. In the kitchen, he found a crowbar among Uncle Eli's tools. Back in the study, he wedged it between the suspicious floorboard and its neighbor. The wood came up with surprising ease, revealing a darkness that seemed to swallow his flashlight beam. Devin peered into the hole and felt his heart skip. This wasn't just a gap between floors. This was an opening, deliberate, constructed, leading down into what looked like a tunnel. He sat back on his heels, crowbar still in his hand, and realized that everything Pete had said about the house being heavy with old sorrow was about to make a lot more sense. The smart thing would be to replace the board and pretend he never found it. The smart thing would be to pack up his laptop and drive back to Atlanta tonight. Instead, Devin Brooks grabbed his flashlight and prepared to descend into whatever secret his Uncle Eli had been keeping buried beneath the floorboards for God knew how many years. Some discoveries, he was about to learn, change everything. The tunnel was barely wide enough for Devin's shoulders. He had to duck walk through the cramped space, his flashlight beam dancing ahead of him as the floorboards of the house groaned somewhere above. The walls were rough-hewn wood, old but sturdy, like someone had taken great care in their construction. The smell that had plagued the study was overwhelming down here, that sickly sweet rot mixed with something sharper, more clinical. After what felt like 20 feet but was probably closer to 10, the tunnel opened into a small room. Devin's flashlight swept across the space, and he had to grip the wall to steady himself. Shelves. Dozens of them, lining every wall from floor to ceiling. And on those shelves, arranged with methodical precision, sat glass jars. Mason jars, baby food jars, old pickle jars, all sizes, all shapes, but each one holding the same thing. A single human tooth. Devin's mouth went dry. He stepped closer, his light revealing small white labels stuck to each jar. Names. Dates. Written in the same careful handwriting. Margaret Hutchins 1967. Tommy Russo 1972. Sarah Chin 1983. The names meant nothing to him, but the dates, they spanned decades. Some labels were yellow with age, others looked fresher. Devin counted quickly. There had to be at least 60 jars, maybe more in the shadows his light couldn't reach. "What the hell, Uncle Eli?" he whispered. His voice echoed strangely in the small space, and Devin realized the smell wasn't coming from the jars. It was coming from the far corner, where a cardboard box sat open on a small table. He approached it like it might bite him. Inside were photographs. Hundreds of them, all Polaroids, all showing faces. Men, women, children, some smiling, some serious, all looking directly at the camera with the awkward stiffness of old portraits. The photos were sorted by decade, rubber banded together in neat stacks. Devin's hands shook as he flipped through them. The faces meant nothing to him, But something about their expressions was unsettling. They all looked resigned, like they knew something he didn't. He was about to put the photos back when one caught his eye. A woman with kind eyes and a nervous smile, her hair styled in the way his mother used to wear hers. Devin held the photo closer to his light. His blood turned to ice. It was his mother, Janice Brooks, clear as day, wearing a dress he'd seen in old family albums. But that wasn't the part that made his knees weak. It was the date written on the back. September 15, 1990. 2 years after his mother had died in a car accident. Devin's flashlight slipped from his numb fingers, clattering to the floor and throwing wild shadows across the walls. In the dancing light, the jars seemed to move, and for a horrible moment he imagined the teeth chattering against the glass like they were trying to speak. He snatched up the flashlight and backed toward the tunnel entrance, the photograph clutched in his other hand. This was impossible. His mother had died when he was 12. He remembered the funeral, remembered his father's red eyes, remembered the way the whole family had moved through those weeks like sleepwalkers. But here she was, smiling nervously at Uncle Eli's camera 2 years after they'd buried her. Devin scrambled back through the tunnel, his shoulders scraping against the walls, his breath coming in short gasps. The study felt like a cathedral after the cramped underground room, and he collapsed onto the floor, still clutching the photograph. He turned it over again, hoping he'd misread the date. But no, September 15, 1990, written in Uncle Eli's careful script. The same handwriting from all those jar labels. Devin's mind raced through possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. Had his mother faked her death? Had Uncle Eli helped her? But why? And what about all those other people in the photographs? All those teeth? He thought about his father's strange behavior on the phone, the way everyone in town seemed to know secrets about his family. Had they all been lying to him his entire life? The photograph stared back at him from the floor where he dropped it. His mother's face, frozen in time, holding secrets he was only beginning to uncover. Devin realized with growing horror that finding the tunnel wasn't the end of the mystery. It was just the beginning. He gathered up the photograph and stood on shaking legs. Tomorrow, he would start asking questions. Tonight, he would try to sleep in a house that no longer felt like just an inheritance. It felt like a tomb full of lies. But as Devin turned off his flashlight and headed for the bedroom, one thought kept circling through his mind like a vulture. If his mother was alive in 1990, what had really happened to her? And why had Uncle Eli been collecting teeth from people whose faces filled that box of photographs? The answers, Devin suspected, were going to be far worse than the questions. Devin didn't sleep. He spent the night sitting at Uncle Eli's kitchen table, staring at the photograph under the harsh fluorescent light. Every few minutes he'd flip it over to check the date again, as if the numbers might have changed. They never did. By sunrise he'd made a decision. He couldn't live with questions that felt like they were eating him alive from the inside. His first stop was the Merrow's Edge Public Library, a tiny brick building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. The librarian, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Patterson, seemed delighted to have a visitor under 60. "I'm looking for information about a car accident," Devin said, keeping his voice casual. "From 1988. Victim was Janice Brooks." Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted slightly. "Janice Brooks? My goodness, I haven't heard that name in years. You said 1988? "Yes, ma'am. September." She disappeared into the back room and returned with a box of old newspaper archives. "We don't have everything digitized yet, I'm afraid. But the Merrow's Edge Gazette covered most local incidents back then." Devin spent 2 hours reading through brittle newspapers before he found it, a small article buried on page 3 of the September 20th, 1988 edition. "Local woman dies in single CR accident." The article was brief. Janice Brooks, 29, of Atlanta, had died when her car left Highway 12 during a rainstorm. She'd been visiting family in the area. Survived by her husband Robert and son Devin. Services would be held in Atlanta. Devin read it 3 times, searching for details that weren't there. No mention of what she was doing on Highway 12. No explanation of why she was visiting Marrow's Edge when Devon couldn't remember ever coming here as a child. "Mrs. Patterson," he called out. "Do you remember this accident?" She looked at the newspaper over his shoulder and nodded slowly. "Terrible thing. Though." She paused, glancing around the empty library. "There were some folks who said it was strange." "Strange how?" "Well, Janice had been staying at the old Clearwater Clinic for a few weeks before the accident. Dr. Hendricks ran it. It was a private facility for people with troubles. Mental troubles, you understand. Folks said she'd been having a hard time, needed some rest." Devon's pulse quickened. "What happened to the clinic?" "Closed down in the early 90s. Dr. Hendricks retired, moved to Florida. But his nurse, Betty Crane, she still lives here. Runs the flower shop on Main Street." 20 minutes later, Devon stood in Crane's Flowers, surrounded by the overwhelming scent of roses and baby's breath. Betty Crane was a small woman with steel gray hair and the kind of sharp eyes that suggested she didn't miss much. "You're asking about Janice Brooks," she said before Devon could introduce himself. "I can see it in your face. You've got her eyes. You remember my mother?" Betty's expression softened. "Course I do. Sweet girl, but troubled. Dr. Hendricks said she was suffering from what they called nervous exhaustion back then. Probably what we'd call severe depression now. The newspaper said she died in a car accident. That's what they said." Betty's tone was carefully neutral. "But—" Betty looked around her shop, as if checking for eavesdroppers among the flower arrangements. "Your mother wasn't supposed to be driving that night. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near Highway 12. Her brother, your Uncle Eli, he'd been taking care of her arrangements. Said the family wanted privacy." Devon's hands clenched into fists. "What do you mean, arrangements?" "She was supposed to be transferred to a long-term facility in Atlanta. Eli had signed all the paperwork, said he was handling everything. But then she just disappeared from the clinic one evening. Next thing we knew, there'd been an accident." "Did you see her leave?" Betty shook her head. "I was working the night shift when she went missing. Eli came by around 10 o'clock, said he needed to collect her things. Said there'd been a change of plans. But when I went to check on her an hour later, her room was empty." Devon felt the world tilting around him. "You think Uncle Eli took her?" "I don't know what to think," Betty said quietly. "But I'll tell you this, Eli Brooks wasn't the same after that night. Used to see him around town regular-like. After Janice died, he turned into a hermit. Wouldn't look anyone in the eye." Devon thanked Betty and stumbled back to his truck, his mind reeling. The timeline was becoming clearer, and it was worse than he'd imagined. Uncle Eli had taken his mother from the clinic the night she disappeared. Hours later, she was supposedly finished in a car accident. But if she was finished, how had she posed for that photograph in 1990? Back at the farmhouse, Devon headed straight for the attic. If Uncle Eli had been keeping secrets about his mother, maybe there were more clues hidden in the house. He pulled down dusty boxes and old furniture, searching for anything that might contain answers. In a trunk wedged behind the water heater, he found them, letters. Dozens of them, tied with a faded ribbon. The return address read, J. Brooks, in his mother's familiar handwriting. Devon's hands trembled as he untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. It was dated October 3, 1988, 2 weeks after his mother's supposed death. Dear Eli, it began. I know you think you're protecting me, but I can't live like this anymore. Hidden away like some shameful secret. Devon needs to know I'm alive. Robert needs to know. This isn't living, it's just another kind of dying. Devon sank to his knees in the dusty attic, surrounded by the evidence of a lie that had shaped his entire life. His mother hadn't died in 1988. She'd been alive, writing letters, begging Uncle Eli to let her return to her family. The question was, what had Uncle Eli done to keep her silent forever? Devon read every letter twice, his mother's voice echoing through the years like a ghost pleading for freedom. The dates told a story that made his stomach turn, October 1988, November 1988, January 1989, March 1989. The letters grew more desperate with each passing month. Eli, please. I'm better now. The episodes have stopped. I just want to see my son again. You can't keep me here forever. People will ask questions. I found the basement room. I know what you've been doing. Those people, they trusted you. The last letter was dated June 15, 1990. After that, nothing. Devin's hands shook as he reread that final letter. What basement room? What people? The jars of teeth flashed through his mind, each one labeled with a name and date. Had his mother discovered Uncle Eli's collection? Is that why the letters stopped? He needed to search the basement. The farmhouse's basement was accessible through a door in the kitchen that Devin had assumed led to a pantry. Instead, wooden steps descended into a musty space filled with the usual basement clutter: old furniture, garden tools, boxes of Christmas decorations that would never see another tree. But something was wrong. The basement felt smaller than it should have been, given the size of the house above. Devin paced off the dimensions, comparing them to his mental map of the upstairs layout. There had to be at least 10 feet of space unaccounted for. He examined the walls more carefully, running his hands along the rough concrete. On the far wall, partially hidden behind a stack of paint cans, he found it, a section where the concrete looked newer, smoother. Someone had sealed off a room. Devin attacked the wall with Uncle Eli's sledgehammer, driven by a fury he didn't fully understand. The concrete cracked on the third swing, revealing hollow space behind it. 20 minutes of demolition work opened a hole large enough to crawl through. His flashlight beam revealed a room that made the tunnel discovery look innocent by comparison. It was set up like a hospital room. A metal bed frame sat against one wall, complete with restraints on the rails. A small table held medical supplies, syringes, bottles of pills, bandages yellowed with age. Children's books were scattered on the floor, their bright covers bizarre against the clinical setting. But it was the wall calendar that made Devin's legs give out. June 1990. The month his mother's letters had stopped. Devin crawled deeper into the room, his light revealing more disturbing details. A box in the corner contained sketches, dozens of them, all in his mother's artistic hand. He recognized her style from the drawings she used to make for him as a child. But these weren't cheerful pictures of animals and flowers. These were portraits. The same faces from the photographs in the tunnel, drawn with obsessive detail. And beneath each sketch, notes in his mother's handwriting. Margaret Hutchins said she had nowhere to go after the factory closed. Eli promised to help her find work. Tommy Russo came looking for his sister. She was here too once. Sarah Chin, just 18. Pregnant and scared. Eli said he'd help her and the baby. Devin's blood ran cold as he read through the notes. These weren't random people. They were patients, lost souls who had come to Uncle Eli for help. And somehow, they'd all ended up as teeth in jars and faces in photographs. At the bottom of the box, he found a journal in his mother's handwriting. The final entry was dated June 14, 1990. I understand now why Eli brought me here. It wasn't to protect the family name or to help me recover. I was just another lost person that nobody would miss, a woman who'd already died once. He's been collecting us for years, people that society forgets. The teeth. God, the teeth are how he remembers us. Each one a person he helped disappear. I thought I could change his mind, make him see that this is wrong. But he's too far gone. He really believes he's helping people by giving them peace from their troubles. He's going to give me that same peace tomorrow. He's already prepared the syringe. If someone finds this, know that we weren't bad people. We were just broken, and Eli promised to fix us. Instead, he made us disappear. Please don't let him do this to anyone else. Devin sat in the darkness of that terrible room, surrounded by the evidence of his uncle's decades-long finishing spree, and finally understood. The smell in the study hadn't been a finished possum. It had been his mother, and all the others, buried beneath the floorboards after Uncle Eli had helped them find peace. The jars weren't trophies. They were a twisted memorial to people the world had forgotten, kept by a man who thought he was showing them mercy. Devon's mother had died in this room, not in a car accident. She died knowing that her own brother was a criminal who preyed on society's most vulnerable people. And Devon had spent his entire life believing a lie designed to protect a monster. The worst part? Uncle Eli had probably convinced himself he was being kind. Devon sat in that basement room for 3 hours, reading and rereading his mother's journal until the words blurred together. When he finally emerged, the sun was setting, painting the farmhouse in shades of red that reminded him too much of the rust stains he'd seen on the medical equipment below. His first instinct was to call the police. His second was to burn the whole place down. Instead, he did something that surprised himself. He called Dr. Sarah Martinez, a therapist he'd seen briefly after his divorce 2 years ago. "Devon? It's been a while. Are you okay? You sound—" "I need help," he interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've discovered something about my family that I don't know how to process." Dr. Martinez listened without judgment as Devon told her everything: the tunnel, the photographs, the letters, the basement room. When he finished, the silence stretched so long he thought the call had dropped. "Devon," she finally said, "what you've discovered is going to take time to process. This kind of generational trauma, family secrets of this magnitude, they don't just affect you, they affect your entire sense of identity. Can you come see me tomorrow? I don't know if I can leave this place yet. There are things I need to figure out first. Then let me give you a number. Dr. James Whitmore runs a clinic in Macon that specializes in historical trauma, families dealing with the aftermath of crimes, hidden abuse, generational secrets. He might be able to help you understand how to move forward." That evening, Devon called Dr. Whitmore and spent 2 hours on the phone with him, walking through every detail of his discovery. Unlike Dr. Martinez's careful therapeutic responses, Dr. Whitmore was direct. "Your uncle was what we call a criminal with a God complex," he said. "He likely believed he was ending suffering for people society had abandoned. The fact that he kept the teeth suggests a need to memorialize his victims. In his mind, he was the only person who cared enough to remember them. What about my mother? Why did he finish her if he was trying to help people? Because she threatened to expose him. In his worldview, protecting his mission was more important than protecting any individual life, even family. Your mother became a threat to his ability to help others." Devon found himself walking through the house as they talked, ending up in the living room where Uncle Eli's Bible sat open on a side table. The pages were marked with hundreds of underlined passages, all about mercy, suffering, and deliverance. "Dr. Whitmore, what am I supposed to do with all this? Do I call the police? Do I turn over the evidence? That's your choice to make. But understand that once you involve law enforcement, this becomes public. Those victims' families, some of them might still be looking for answers about their missing loved ones. You could give them closure." Devon spent that night walking the property, trying to imagine how many bodies might be buried on the land that was now his. In the morning, he made his decision. He called the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Agent Rebecca Torres arrived that afternoon with a full forensics team. Devon handed over the photographs, the letters, his mother's journal, and the keys to the basement room. He watched from the porch as investigators in white suits carried evidence bags out of his inheritance. "Mr. Brooks," Agent Torres said, joining him on the porch as the sun set behind the pecan trees. "We've identified preliminary evidence of at least 15 potential victims based on the materials you provided. This is going to be a long investigation. What happens to the house? It's a crime scene now. We'll need to excavate the property, search for remains. Could take months, maybe longer." Devon nodded. He'd expected as much. "There's something else," Agent Torres continued. "We ran the names from those jars through missing persons databases. Several matches came back, people who disappeared over the years, cases that went cold. You've potentially solved decades-old mysteries." That night, Devon drove to the Marrow's Edge Cemetery and found his mother's gravestone. The irony wasn't lost on him. She was buried in a place she'd never truly rested, while her real grave was somewhere on Uncle Eli's property. He knelt beside the headstone and placed his mother's final photograph against the marble. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find the truth," he whispered. "But I found it. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows who you really were, not just another victim, but the person who tried to stop him." Standing in that cemetery, Devin made a promise. He wouldn't let Uncle Eli's twisted version of mercy be the end of this story. The victims deserved better than forgotten teeth in jars. They deserved their names spoken aloud, their stories told, their families given answers. His mother had died trying to stop a monster. The least Devin could do was make sure her sacrifice meant something. 6 months later, Devin stood in what had once been Uncle Eli's study, watching sunlight stream through windows that no longer held the stench of buried secrets. The GBI had finished their excavation, recovering the remains of 17 people from various locations around the property. 17 families finally had answers. 17 cold cases finally closed. The tunnel was gone, sealed with concrete and steel. The basement room had been gutted and filled with fresh concrete. The investigators had been thorough, but they'd also been respectful, understanding that this was more than just a crime scene. It was Devin's attempt to reclaim a home from a nightmare. "The flooring looks good," said Marcus, the contractor Devin had hired from Atlanta. Like everything else about the renovation, Devin had insisted on doing it right. The study now had warm hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, and a reading chair positioned to catch the morning light. No trace remained of the horrors that had festered beneath. "Thanks, Marcus. I think that's the last of it." Devin had made an unexpected decision 3 months into the investigation. Instead of selling the farmhouse and running back to Atlanta, he'd decided to stay. Not forever, but long enough to do something meaningful with the property that had held so much pain. The decision had surprised everyone, including himself. Dr. Martinez had helped him understand it during one of their weekly video sessions. "You're not just renovating a house," she'd said. "You're renovating your family's legacy. Taking something that represented harm and transforming it into something that represents healing." That transformation had taken many forms. Devin had donated his mother's drawings and journals to the Georgia Historical Society's collection on mental health history, with all identifying information carefully redacted. The sketches of Uncle Eli's victims had helped investigators confirm identities and bring closure to families, but Devin felt they deserved to be remembered as more than just evidence. The old Clearwater Clinic building in town had been abandoned for years, but Devin had worked with the mayor to turn it into a community center. He'd used a portion of his inheritance, money that felt tainted until he found a way to make it clean, to fund mental health resources for rural communities. Betty Crane had been the first to volunteer, bringing her no-nonsense compassion to help coordinate services. "People still need help," Betty had told him when he first proposed the idea. "Difference is, now they'll get real help." Devin had also started something he called the Memory Project. Working with Dr. Whitmore, he'd created a digital archive documenting the stories of Uncle Eli's victims, not as they'd died, but as they'd lived. Family members shared photographs, memories, and stories that painted these 17 people as whole human beings rather than forgotten casualties. Margaret Hutchins had been a seamstress who sent money to her elderly mother every month until she disappeared. Tommy Russo had been looking for his sister Maria, who'd also vanished while seeking Uncle Eli's help. Sarah Chin had been a teenager with dreams of becoming a teacher, pregnant and scared but determined to build a better life for her child. Their stories mattered. Their lives mattered. Uncle Eli had tried to erase them, but Devin was determined to help the world remember them properly. On this particular afternoon, Devin was preparing for his final act of renovation. In the backyard, where the GBI had found his mother's remains beneath what Uncle Eli had told neighbors was a vegetable garden, Devin had planted a dogwood tree. The memorial stone was simple. Janice Brooks' beloved mother, she tried to do right. But Devin had kept one jar from Uncle Eli's collection. His mother's. Not as a monument to her death, but as a reminder of her courage. It sat on his desk in the renovated study, next to a framed photo of her from before the tragedy, smiling and whole and alive. Devon's phone buzzed with a text from his father, who had finally started therapy after learning the truth about Janice's death. "Coming down this weekend to see the finished house. Proud of what you've done, son." Looking out the study window at the dogwood tree, its spring blossoms bright against the Georgia sky, Devon felt something he hadn't expected when he'd first arrived in Marrow's Edge: peace. Not the twisted peace Uncle Eli had believed he was providing his victims, but real peace. The kind that comes from facing hard truths and choosing to build something better from the wreckage. Devon had learned that some discoveries do change everything. But sometimes, if you're brave enough to sit with the pain and do the work, change can lead to something beautiful. The house was ready now. Ready to be a home instead of a tomb. Ready to hold new memories instead of old secrets. Ready for Devon to finally, truly, come home.